When you move into a new neighborhood, you expect a few things, maybe some friendly waves from the neighbors, the occasional block party, and the smell of freshly cut grass on Saturday mornings. What you don't expect is to have your entire life micromanaged by a group of retirees who take themselves way too seriously. But that's exactly what happened when I moved into Willow Creek. I'd barely been there 2 weeks when I got my first official notice from the HOA, the Homeowners Association. It was hand-delivered by a woman named Carol McMillan, the self-appointed queen of our cul-de-sac. Carol was in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that didn't move no matter how strong the wind blew, and a wardrobe that screamed, "I shop exclusively at pastel outlet stores." The notice was about my mailbox. Apparently, it was the wrong shade of beige. Not tan. Not cream. Beige number 17, as specified in the Willow Creek HOA bylaws, which, I later discovered, was a 32-page document with more rules than my high school student handbook. "You'll need to have that corrected within 7 days, Carol informed me, standing in my driveway like a cop handing out a speeding ticket. "Is it really that big of a deal?" I asked, glancing at the mailbox. It was a mailbox. A perfectly functional one. She gasped like I'd just suggested sacrificing a goat in the front yard. "Rules are rules, dear. We can't have the neighborhood looking unkempt." Unkempt? It was a mailbox, not a junkyard. That was my first warning. Over the next few weeks, I got notices about my lawn being 2 centimeters too long, my garbage cans being visible from the street for more than 24 hours, and my personal favorite, my holiday wreath, being too large for the doorframe. It was like living under a dictatorship where the dictator wore capri pants and a visor. The breaking point came when I received a letter in an actual envelope, this time informing me that I'd been fined $154 inappropriate lawn decor. The offending item? A garden gnome my grandmother had given me. Apparently, according to the HOA, whimsical lawn ornaments detracted from the uniform aesthetic of the neighborhood. I marched right to the HOA office, which, by the way, was just a room in the community center with a fold-out table, and demanded to speak to whoever was in charge. That's when I met the full council. There was Harold, the treasurer, who wore suspenders and looked like he'd been mad since 1974. Denise, the secretary, who typed with 2 fingers and stared at me like she was memorizing my face for a police sketch. And, of course, Carol, sitting in the middle like a smug queen on her throne. "We appreciate your feedback," Carol said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But the fine stands. And just a reminder, failure to pay could result in further penalties." Further penalties? What was next? Exile from the neighborhood? I left that meeting furious. I paid the fine, but in my head, I was already planning my revenge. And then, fate handed me the perfect opportunity. At the next HOA meeting, Carol announced that the association would be hosting the annual Willow Creek Beautification Awards in 2 months, a big event where neighbors competed for the best lawn, best seasonal decor, and the grand prize, neighborhood treasure. The winner's house would be featured on the HOA website, in the local paper, and in the monthly community newsletter, all things Carol lived for. Carol made it clear she intended to win. She'd won for the past 5 years in a row, and the other council members acted like it was a foregone conclusion she'd win again. That's when it hit me. If Carol loved her perfect image so much, I'd ruin it. Not with something illegal, no, that would get me in trouble. But with something public, humiliating, and impossible for her to spin in her favor. And that's how Operation HOA-tastrophe was born. Operation HOA-tastrophe wasn't just going to be petty, it was going to be art. I wanted Carol's downfall to unfold slowly, like a fine wine being poured, except the wine was cheap and sour, and everyone would spit it out in disgust. The first step was intel. I needed to know everything about Carol, her habits, her schedule, her likes and dislikes, and most importantly, what she feared. Lucky for me, Carol wasn't exactly a master of privacy. She had this habit of standing on her porch every morning with her coffee, chatting loudly on the phone about everything from her bunion surgery to the new people who were ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. Spoiler, she meant me. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned 1. Carol watered her lawn every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m. with a pink hose that matched her pink gardening gloves. 2. She took her Shih Tzu, Muffin, for a walk at 5:30 p.m., rain or shine. 3. She was deathly afraid of squirrels. Like, scream and run afraid. 4. She had an obsessive compulsion to tidy public spaces, even if they weren't hers. Bingo! I recruited my next-door neighbor, Ted, into the operation. Ted was a retired engineer who spent most of his time building bizarre inventions in his garage, like a Roomba that mowed the lawn or a toaster that played the national anthem. Ted didn't like Carol either. She'd once fined him for having an unsightly hedge that was, in his words, a perfectly respectable hedge. When I told Ted my plan, his face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "Oh, I've been waiting for this day," he said, disappearing into his garage. 2 days later, he emerged with my first weapon, the Squirrelator 3000. It was basically a bird feeder rigged with a motion sensor that, when triggered, released a loud squirrel chatter sound. The idea was to lure squirrels into Carol's yard and watch her spiral into panic. We installed it in the big oak tree right next to her property line under cover of darkness. The next morning, I was sipping my coffee when I heard the first scream. Carol was out there in her robe, waving her arms at 3 confused squirrels who were happily feasting in her prize-winning flower bed. Muffin was barking, the pink hose was spraying wildly, and I swear one of the squirrels looked directly at me, as if to say, "Nice work, buddy." Step 1, complete. Step 2 involved the Beautification Awards. I knew Carol would go all out: fresh flowers, trimmed hedges, tasteful garden sculptures. So I decided to introduce a little theme and consistency. You see, the rules said nothing about anonymous donations to a neighbor's yard. And I happened to know a novelty decor store downtown that sold the most hideous lawn ornaments imaginable. Think giant neon flamingos, a gnome riding a unicorn, and, my personal favorite, a 3-foot-tall plastic frog wearing sunglasses. Over the next month, every few days, I anonymously donated a new piece to Carol's front yard. At first, she assumed they were from some misguided admirer. Then she started panicking. I'd watch from my window as she ran outside in her gardening hat, frantically trying to hide the latest monstrosity in her garage. By the time judging week rolled around, Carol was a wreck. The final straw came the day before the awards when Ted and I executed Phase 3, the glitter sprinkler. Ted had modified one of those rotating lawn sprinklers to release a fine mist of biodegradable glitter. We set it up in the strip of grass between our properties, perfectly angled so that every time Carol's automatic sprinklers went off, her pristine lawn got a sparkly makeover. The morning of the Beautification Awards, Carol stepped outside and froze. Her once perfect lawn shimmered in the sunlight like a Las Vegas billboard. She dropped her watering can. Muffin barked. Somewhere, a squirrel chattered approvingly. The judging committee arrived at 10 a.m., clipboards in hand. I stood at my window, pretending to water my plants while eavesdropping. Carol tried desperately to explain the glitter situation, the mysterious ornaments, and the squirrel infestation, but the judges just exchanged puzzled looks. By the time they reached my house, I was ready. My lawn wasn't perfect, it was deliberately relaxed, but I'd added a tasteful wreath, some freshly potted flowers, and a single decorative gnome. The judges seemed relieved to see a yard that wasn't a chaotic art project gone wrong. Later that evening, the results were posted on the community bulletin board. Best lawn went to Mrs. Peterson, best seasonal decor to the Millers, and the grand prize, neighborhood treasure, went to me. Carol's name wasn't on the list at all. She stood there, staring at the paper like it was a death certificate. Harold patted her on the shoulder. Denise handed me the little gold plaque with a forced smile. Ted whispered, "Operation HOA catastrophe complete." But I wasn't done yet. Because the real revenge, the piece de resistance, was going to happen at the HOA meeting that very night. The HOA meeting was held in the community clubhouse, which was really just a glorified storage shed with folding chairs and a suspiciously sticky carpet. A pot of lukewarm coffee sat in the corner, next to a tray of store-brand cookies no one touched unless they were desperate. I arrived early, plaque in hand, ready for the performance of a lifetime. Ted was already there, pretending to read the HOA charter but actually scrolling through Squirrel memes on his phone. We had agreed on one thing: tonight, we wouldn't just win, we'd humiliate Carol so thoroughly she'd think twice before wielding her HOA clipboard again. Carol arrived 5 minutes late, which for her was basically unheard of. Normally she was the first one there, notebook in hand, ready to glare at anyone who dared suggest a change to the standards. Tonight, though, she looked frazzled. Her hair was frizzing from what I assumed was a glitter-related meltdown, and Muffin was barking from the hallway because apparently she couldn't bear to leave him home. Denise, our ever-unenthusiastic HOA president, called the meeting to order. First on the agenda, she droned, is community event planning. Then we'll discuss the Beautification Awards results. Carol visibly twitched at the mention of the awards. Ted and I exchanged a glance. Showtime. We sat through 20 minutes of mind-numbing discussions about holiday lights, block party permits, and whether Gary from Lot 12 should be fined for having a basketball hoop. Then Denise moved to the awards portion. As you all know, Denise said, we had a wonderful turnout for the Beautification Awards. Congratulations to our winners, especially our new neighborhood treasure. She turned to me with a smile that was only slightly sarcastic. Who really showed us how to keep things charming yet approachable. The room gave a polite clap. Carol's jaw tightened. Thank you, I said, standing up with the plaque. It's an honor to win. I just want to say, I couldn't have done it without my neighbor's constant inspiration. I made direct eye contact with Carol. Especially the creative touches I saw in certain yards. Really opened my mind to new, design possibilities. Ted coughed loudly to hide a laugh. Carol finally snapped. You think this is funny? You think someone just magically gets a lawn full of squirrels, tacky lawn junk, and, she gestured wildly, an entire glitter infestation overnight? The room went silent. Denise blinked. Gary from Lot 12 took a slow sip of coffee. Carol, Denise said cautiously, are you saying you had yard sabotage? Yes. Carol shouted. Sabotage. Someone's been planting hideous ornaments in my yard, unleashing vermin, and, she lowered her voice dramatically, coating my grass in sparkles. The whole room erupted into laughter. Even Harold chuckled into his hand. It's not funny. Carol barked. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to keep this neighborhood looking respectable? And now, she pointed at me, this amateur gardener wins neighborhood treasure while my yard looks like a circus sideshow. I widened my eyes innocently. Oh, Carol. You're giving me too much credit. I mean, I wish I had thought of something that brilliant. Glitter? Gnomes? Squirrels? That's inspired. Ted lost it. He started wheezing, tears streaming down his face. Squirrel, invasion, priceless, he gasped. Carol slammed her hands on the folding table so hard the coffee cups rattled. If the HOA won't take this seriously, I'll go to the county. I'll get cameras installed on every street corner. She stopped mid-rant because Muffin, who'd been tied to her chair leg, had somehow gotten tangled in the leash and was now dragging her chair across the sticky carpet. Carol stumbled, tripped over the chair, and landed in the snack table. The tray of cookies flipped into the air like a slow-motion action scene, raining down on her head. The room went completely silent for a beat. Then Gary, bless his soul, said, well, guess Carol finally made her yard decorations portable. The clubhouse exploded in laughter. People were wiping their eyes, banging on the tables. Ted was on the floor. Denise had her face buried in her hands, but I could see her shoulders shaking. Carol, covered in cookie crumbs, stood up with what dignity she could muster. This neighborhood has lost its standards, she hissed. When I'm gone, don't say I didn't warn you. She grabbed Muffin and stormed out, the leash dragging her chair halfway before it tipped over. The door slammed, and just like that, Carol was gone. There was a moment of silence, then Denise cleared her throat. Well, moving on. Any new business? Ted leaned over to me, still grinning. You think she's actually moving? I shrugged. If not, she'll at least avoid me for a while. Which is almost better. Over the next few weeks, Carol kept a low profile. Her lawn returned to its manicured perfection, but she didn't hover with her clipboard anymore. She avoided HOA events entirely. Every so often, I'd catch her peeking through her blinds at Ted and me, but the moment I waved, she'd vanish. And honestly? That was victory enough. Ted and I celebrated with beers on my porch, watching squirrels run along the fence. You know, Ted said, I could upgrade the Squirrelator. Solar power, automatic peanut dispenser, I laughed. Let's keep it on standby. Just in case she ever forgets her place. We clinked bottles, the golden plaque shining in the porch light. The HOA catastrophe was over, and I was the reigning neighborhood treasure with the most peaceful front yard in town. For now.